Hey, it's good to have you all with us today. Got a nice crowd in view of the fact we got so many folks sick. But don't the sun make you want to get out more? Yeah, man, I tell you, I feel better. I think that's the best medicine I take is a nice warm sunball. But it's good to have you all with us. I'm going to begin a new series today. I'm not exactly sure how long we'll go because I'm going to make it up as I go. The home as God would have it. When I was thinking about where to start the other day, I thought, well, I'll start with marriage because that's where it begins. And I wrote me out a sermon on it. And then yesterday I was thinking about it again. I thought, well, that's not where it really begins. It begins whenever we start dating. That's where it actually begins. It's important to know how to date. As odd as that might sound to some, especially young people, what is there to know? Somebody asks, you say yes or no, and you go. Dating is it's very important for us to understand the importance of making healthy decisions when we choose to date a person. I know a lot of young people, when you listen to an older guy like me, you think, well, he's old. He doesn't know what's going on. Well, I haven't always been old. There was a time when I was young. And I've got an added bonus through the years, the last 35 years. I've talked to, I guess, hundreds of couples who are living in unhappy marriages, unhappy people. And that's a bad way to live. It's very bad to live life and be unhappy. You make a commitment when you get married, forever till death do we part, and you're going to be with this person now until you die, unless you just disregard what the Lord said. And to live with a person you don't want to live with, that's an awful, awful thing to have to go through. And there are hundreds and thousands of people that are doing that very thing. And a lot of them got themselves in that situation because they made the wrong choice when they decided to date somebody. Because even though you see a person, you think, well, I'll go out with him and it's not going to amount to anything because I don't even like him. You may feel that way when you go out with somebody, even though I don't know why you would date somebody you don't like. But sometimes girls especially, they like bad boys. And I'm going to go out with him, but I'm not going to marry him. And lo and behold, you fall in love with that rascal. And wind up getting married to a bad boy. And then you take your bad boy home. He gives you 3 or 4 children. And while you're at home taking care of the children, he's out being a bad boy. It's not a good way to live. It's a horrible, horrible existence. But there are so many people living that way. I talk to them all the time. And there's nothing a lot of them can do. They got themselves in a pickle. They made their bed, Mama always said, now you got to lie in it. And that's where a lot of folks wind up. You got to be smart when you date. You got to be smart. You got to be smarter than the average bear. You want to make sure that you make good and healthy choices. One of the things I think is so important for a person to do as they marry is to remember the problems of being in the wrong associations. One of the things I hate to see, I really do, is Christian teenagers dating people who are not Christians. It's troubling because there are problems that can arise in such a household if they go on and get married. There are truths taught in the Bible that warn us of this very thing. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good morals. And I've had people argue, yes, but even though my husband, even though he's not a Christian, we're getting along just fine. Well, no, you're not either. There are some situations where a spouse that is not a Christian might accommodate their husband or wife and children by going to church services with them on a regular basis. But when a mother or father, one or the other, is not a Christian, it makes it very difficult for their spouse, and it makes it very difficult for the children. Marriage, one of the points of marriage, or one of the purposes of marriage, is to be a helper to your mate. And when a Christian's married to a non-Christian, the non-Christian can't help the Christian, because there's so much they cannot understand because they do not have the Spirit of Christ. It's hard for them to understand their feelings. It's hard for them to be a support like they try to be. It's very difficult because it's just something that can't be done unless we are in a right relationship with God ourselves. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good intentions. It will. It'll do that with any of us. It's very important. If you're a child or you're a teenager and you're in high school and you hang out with the wrong kids, chances are you're going to make bad decisions. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. There's no such thing as a pet rule. There are exceptions to the rule. But most of the time, there will be a change take place in the Christian. Some of the attitudes, some of the ways of your friends will rub off on you. And someone will say, well, maybe my good ways will rub off on them. Well, that's true. That's the possibility. If you're strong enough spiritually, if you're a strong enough person, but that's not usually the case. In most cases, and I've seen many, many, many cases, in most cases, the Christian loses their faith somewhere along the road. God said, therefore, come out from among them, be separated. Why do you think God says that? He knows. He knows that can be a problem for us. He knows that if we hang out with the wrong people, that can be a problem for us. Now, I'm not saying we should abstain from all of our friendships. I don't believe that at all. But if we're going to spend the bulk of our time with people who live a different philosophy than we do, there is the danger of the philosophy they live by becoming our philosophy, at least in part. I know a girl one time, she was a Christian girl, and when she became early 20s, she fell away from the faith. And the reason was she had a friend who was a Buddhist. She was a very, very good friend to her, like a sister. And the Bible teaches, Jesus teaches, that he is the one and only way to the Father. John 14:6. You know, there's no other way to get to the Father. And because Jesus said he was the only way to the Father, which implies that this girl who's of the Buddha persuasion, implies that she cannot get to the Father. This made this girl angry, and she fell away from the faith. Her friendship with this person was so strong that it superseded her friendship with the Son of God, and it was a real problem. You have to be careful as a teenager who you hang out with. Parents have to be careful, and every parent ought to be mindful of what I'm saying, because it's your job to make sure this is what happens. You need to be mindful of the associations of your children, because they can get in a mess that can last all their life long. And it's not funny, and it's not cute. It's horrible. It's awful to watch people live that way. But that's the way so many, many people have to live. Know what you want to be before you date. Know what you want to be. Make up your mind. Do you want to be a devout Christian? Is that what you intend to be all the days of your life? Make a decision. If you're a Christian, you should have already made that decision. If you haven't made that decision, you've got to make it now. What do you want to be? Set your goals. Aspire to those goals. And expect to be that. Know what you want in a date or spouse. Know what you want. If you're a Christian, well, the first thing you want is a Christian. That's the first thing on your list. I want a Christian husband so he can be a Christian father to my children. I want a Christian because a Christian can help me get to heaven. I want a Christian because a Christian can help us get our children to heaven if we ever have children. Now, we can joke about it when we're a teenager because this is off 5, 6, 7 years. But before you turn around and spit twice, it's going to be right in your face. You're going to find yourself in that situation. And you've got to be careful. What do you want in a spouse? Know what you want. And expect that. Settle for nothing less than that. Wait till the right one comes. Wait till the one that fits your bill comes. Don't settle for less. If you settle for less, even though you have no intention of it, you might get bit by the love bug, and before you know it, your emotions are driving you rather than your intelligence, and you won't make wise decisions. Set your goals. What do you want in a spouse? Do you want a person who may cheat on you? Well, everyone says no. Well, then don't date such a person. Do you want a Christian? Well, yes. Well, then date a Christian. Whatever it is you want, know what you want. Expect that. And don't settle for anything less than that. You've got a right to have what you want. And you ought to stick to your guns. In Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18, the Lord said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him." Now that's a general rule. That means that rule doesn't apply to all people. There are some people who don't need a spouse. Now, one of the things that's, I think it's disturbing, is when parents push their kids to either go steady with a particular person or to get married. That is not, I don't believe, a good idea. I think that's a very bad idea. There's something in our psyche that says when you get a certain age, you must have a husband or a wife. Well, who said so? Who said you have to have a husband or a wife? Marriage is an option. It is not an obligation. Weak people have to get married. Strong people, they don't have to. It's not good for a man to be alone. Why? He can't function well by himself. Therefore, I'm going to make someone who can help him on the way to heaven. Somebody who can prop him up. Now, there are some people who are so strong as an individual, they don't have to have that. They don't need somebody to prop them up. They don't need a helper. They stand on their own 2 feet. I don't know why we got it in our minds that a child must get married. If they choose not to get married, it doesn't mean they're weak. It means the exact opposite. There's no shame in not having a spouse. But if you need a spouse, you have to be careful about the spouse you get. If you don't want one, then don't get one. I know a young man, this goes back 30 years ago. He was a Christian, a member of the church at Sycamore. His whole family went to church there. He didn't want to date when he was in high school, and it bugged his mama. Bugged his daddy a little bit, but bugged his mama mostly. But he didn't want to date. Occasionally, Mama would actually bring a girl home to him. And, of course, he was stuck with her and had to do whatever it was they were going to do. But then he went through college, never brought anybody home. He never dated anybody. He wasn't a homosexual. He just had no desire to date. Well, he got out of college, and Mama was on his back. He lived at home with Mom and Daddy, and Mama's on his back. You know, you got to get a wife. You got to get a wife. You got to get a wife. I mean, she drove the boy nuts. So what happened? In time, he got a wife. And he moved in. He lived with this wife, and they had a son. And about 1 year, maybe 2 years after that son was born, he decided he couldn't take it. He couldn't take it. He didn't want to be with her. He didn't want to be with anyone. It was nothing against her. He wanted to be by himself. And he told her, he said, I want a divorce. And she said, you know what the Bible teaches? We can't get a divorce. And he said, I know one way we can. And he was a truck driver. And the next time he went out on his route, he come back home, and he said, I committed adultery, and now we're going to get a divorce. Well, it made her mad because he did that, and they got a divorce. Well, she went on, and a few 5, 6 years later, she remarried, but he lived by himself, and to this day, he still lives by himself. He didn't want to get married. He didn't want to. And his mama and his daddy, they pushed and they pushed and they pushed. They thought something's wrong with him. You're supposed to get married. And now the boy, he's got a son that he hardly ever sees. He's got a son that was raised by another man. He's got a lot of reasons to be unhappy. He committed a sin because he wanted to dissolve his marriage. And he's not sure about his connection to God. So here was a boy, a fine Christian boy, everything going for him in the beginning. And now, because pressure was put on this man to marry when he didn't want to get married, he tried it, he couldn't stand it, he got out of it, and ever since he's been unhappy. Today he doesn't go to church anymore. Been better if Mom and Daddy had stayed out of his business. Been a lot better if they'd let that boy make his own choice. If he didn't want to get married, fine. Marriage is an option, not an obligation. Those who have to have a helper, they need a spouse. Those who can't abstain from sensual contact, they need to have a spouse. But there are some people who do not need that, and they need to remain alone. This is the way Jesus Christ was. This is the way Paul the Apostle was. There's not something wrong with a person because they don't want to get married. Some people are just that way, and they ought not be pushed into a bad situation. Every time I think about this one, it breaks my heart. Marriage is an until death do we part commitment. Yes, but we're only talking about dating. I know that. But you'd be surprised how fast dating will jump to marriage. It'll do it before you know what hit you. If you get in there and get hit with that love bug, you're going to get all messed up. And then there's all kinds of peer pressure that comes into play. People start having children. People start getting married even before they get out of high school. You may be 16, 17 years old. But if your friends are doing something, there's the possibility that you may do what they're doing. Because you don't want to be alone. You don't want to seem like an outsider with your close friends. You must be careful. So careful. Some people feel pressure. A lot of teenagers feel pressure. They won't talk to you about it face to face, but there's things online that are said. There's things in magazines that are said. I've got all kinds of quotations from teenagers about the pressure they feel being a teenager. What it's like to be a 16-year-old girl in school and try to fit in. It can be very hard. What it's like to be a 16-year-old boy and fit in. We all want to fit in. At least most of us do. There are some people who are so strong, they can stand on their own 2 feet. They can stand their ground. They don't give way to peer pressure. But me and thousands of people like me, we cave to the peer pressure. That's what I did when I was a teenager. I know what it's like wanting to fit in there. So you have to be careful about who you date. Know what you want in a mate. Know what you want to do with your life. Make a commitment to that, and then live accordingly. Do not veer off your course. Many people marry for the wrong reason because of the pressure they feel. Let's go over a few of these and see if any of you youngsters ever felt any of these. Some seek financial security. There's many people who marry for financial security. Marry somebody that's because they got a house. Marry somebody because they got a good job. Marry somebody because they're a doctor and they're going to be rich one day. Marry somebody because you know you'll be set for life. When I was a boy, there was a song put out by the Eagles. It was called Lying Eyes. It addressed a common phenomenon at that time where city girls married rich men. It was an easy thing to do. All she had to do was look at him the right way, and he'd fall over on his head, fall in love. He'd marry her and give her the biggest old rock you ever seen. But then those nights get very, very lonely. And that's what this song talks about, all the pain and the suffering that follows such a bad, bad decision. But some people get married because they see financial security. Sometimes parents will push it. They see, you need to marry him. He's going to be a doctor. You need to marry him. He's got his own practice. You need to marry him. He's already the president of the company that he works for in Cookeville. Sometimes, without meaning to, we as parents will push our people, our children, to marry someone because they will be financially set for life. That's not a good reason to get married. Some seek a better life, anywhere but home. I have got to get out of this house. I can understand why some people want out of the house they live in with mom and daddy. Sometimes, especially in this generation we're living in, home with mom and daddy is anything but a home. It's more akin to a hell than a home. And there's a lot of teenagers who have made their mind, as quick as I get 18, I'm booking it out that door. And sometimes the only way out the door is marriage, because once you get out that door, you got to house yourself. You've got to be able to clothe and feed yourself. And sometimes a person is not in a position to do that for themselves, so they'll look for somebody else who can do it for them. I want to marry him. I'm going to marry him because I have got to get out of this house. I can't stand it anymore. It's a shame that mothers and fathers would create such an environment for their children, but you and I both know that there are many people that are doing that now. Many, many parents are creating a home environment that nobody would want to live in, much less a child. Some want to escape a boring home. This is during what I call the Twilight Zone years. I still remember my Twilight Zone years. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no goals. I had no aspirations. I more or less, I was in a Twilight Zone. I existed. If the crowd went to the right, I went with them. If the crowd went to the left, I went with them. I had no goals. I aspired to nothing. But I was having fun out and out with my friends. And at home, it's so boring. You go home, and what do you got to do? You got to do your schoolwork. What do you got to do? You got to do chores. All these things that mom and daddy makes us do when we'd rather be out doing something that's more fun. First chance I get, I'm getting out of this house because I am bored to death with my mother and father. I'm going to tell you something. Being bored is a whole lot better than being unhappy when you're living with someone who's out with someone else, Or when you're living with someone who, when they come in, they'll beat you. Or when you're living with someone who is mean to you. There's a lot worse things you can run across than boring. Some marry out of revenge. I'll show them. Sometimes it's the parents. I'll show my parents. I don't need them. And the first rascal pops up and says, "You want to marry me?" "Yeah. I'm going to show them." Or maybe it's a ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. The ex-boyfriend, he dumped you, and now he's out with this other girl. And, well, I'll show him I don't need him. I wonder how many times that one right there has happened. You know, it's happened a lot. There are a lot of young people, male and female, who have gotten married just to show the ex-boyfriend or girlfriend that they didn't need them. And you know what? They wanted them the whole time. They really wanted that person. So you know what they did? They married this other person, and because they loved this other person so much they couldn't get over it, they started cheating with them. And before you know it, they got a divorce, and they went back and got the other one. That happens a lot. It happens a lot. Somebody gets angry. They're going to prove a point to usually a boyfriend or girlfriend, and they'll marry somebody they do not want to be married to. And sometimes they hook up again, even though they're married, and that creates an even worse environment. Some marry because all their friends are getting married. This is one that scares me because this is the one I see most often. All my friends are getting married. I need to get married. What's wrong with me? How come I'm not getting married? I'm 20 years old. I should be married by now. I'm 20, for crying out loud. I should have a husband. I should have a wife. Maybe you're like me, and you have to get older before you can get married. I don't know how old I was. I was older. But some people are older than me. I just forgot. Anyway, what do you say, moving along? Sometimes, because our friends are getting married, sometimes people have children because their friends are having children. That's not a good reason. That's a bad reason. You're doing something not because you want to. You're doing something because you want to be like your friends. And that's not going to make you happy. When you go home at night, yes, you may have a husband or wife just like your friends do. But when you go home at night, you may discover that you really don't love this person. You really don't have anything in common with this person. You know, you're opposites. He goes his way, you go your way. It's like daylight and dark. And here you are, you're so unhappy. You're like all your friends, your girlfriends or boyfriends. Yeah, you got a wife or a husband just like they do, but there's one big difference. They're happy, you're not. And you need to be happy. You need to be happy. So you got to be smart up front. Some marry to cover up a mistake. You know what I'm talking about. Bad thing. Used to do that a whole lot. They would send a girl off somewhere to after she had a baby. They would leave the baby wherever she had it at, and the girl would come home. She took a semester of school in Europe or something. Sometimes a girl is disowned by parents. They won't let her come back. She's got nowhere else to go. She goes to you-know-who. And sometimes when they think they'll get married because something like that happens, they discover that what's-his-name is gone. And there's the girl sitting there by herself. He said he loved me. He said he would always be with me. Honey, a boy will tell you anything he has to. They don't mind lying to get what they want. You got to be wise. Be wise. Always be wise. Some marry because somebody's purty. That's what B.R. did. You know, that's not a good way to get married. You know, pretty people, my experience has been, pretty people, a pretty man can have any girl in school. He had his pick of the litter. Same thing was true about a knockout girl, but it's a little different with a girl. Most boys are afraid to ask a pretty girl out because they know she'll say no. So a lot of boys who would, they will not. But a pretty boy, he'll ask the girls. And a lot of them will go just because he's so pretty. And then all the friends, they envy her. Oh, my, you got Joe Smith? My, you're lucky. This is so wonderful. And she feels so good because everybody thinks she's a superstar. And then she decides to marry Joe Smith. Not all the time, but most of the time. You remember Joe Smith before you got married who could have any girl that he wanted to? Well, Joe Smith, after you get married, can still have any girl he wants to. And there are a whole lot of Joe Smiths that will take advantage of their good looks. Marrying somebody because they're pretty, it may be okay. BR now, we got by with it. But a lot of the time, it doesn't work out too good. It doesn't work out. You get your heart broken. You get your heart broken. And that is so awful. Some marry out of desperation. This might be my last chance. Boy, if I don't accept this proposal, I'll never get another one. I think this happens a lot too. Here I am, I'm 23 years old, and this is the first time anybody asked me to marry him. Boy, it's going to be another 23 years where somebody asks me again. You know, if I don't do it now, I ain't never going to get to do it. So they'll up and marry somebody. This happens, probably more than we really like to know. People marry for bad reasons. And a lot of times, it causes problems. But even if you get married for a bad reason, it doesn't mean that there has to be problems. When I was in India, there was one of the brethren over there told me something I'll never forget as long as I live. He said, in America, you people get married because you fall in love. He said, in India, we fall in love because we get married. And I had to think about that a while. When he first said it, I didn't get it. But after I went back to my room, I stewed on what he said. And what he said was the absolute truth. If you make up your mind to be happy, if you make up your mind to love the person you're married to, and what love is, at least the best kind of love of all, is the commitment to take care of your spouse, to give them whatever they want, of course within reason, to do everything in your power to try to help them be the best child of God they could possibly be, and spend all the days of your life trying to get them to heaven. These are choices that we make. And every one of us has the capacity to make the right choice. And a person who makes the right choice can live a very happy life. A very, very happy life. How do you think these countries where marriages are prearranged, why do you think their divorce rate is so small in comparison to ours? Have you ever thought about that? Over here, we choose who we want to marry, and we got a 50% divorce rate or more by now. In India, they're told who they're going to marry, and I don't know what their divorce rate is, but I do know it's nothing close to 50%. I mean, it's probably down in the single digits. The difference between them and us, I think, is that they make a commitment And they are bound and determined to keep that commitment. I committed myself to be this woman's husband. And I'm going to be the best husband I can be as long as we live. And the woman, she did the same thing. I'm going to be the best wife I can be to this man as long as we both live. And you know what happens? They live and they're happy. But it takes both to be on the same page before that'll work. Be careful who you date. Look for certain qualities in a person. Expect that. And settle for nothing less. Choose a person that'll make you happy. There's a question I always ask people, especially, well, no, I guess I ask both, before they get married when I talk with them. And the question is this. Suppose you and him has 2 children. We go out 5 years. The children are ages 2 and the other one's age 4. And then one day you're out in your car going to work and you get in a traffic accident and you're killed. You've left 2 children behind. Do you trust this man enough to let him pick out their next mother? And you'd be surprised how many times people change their mind about getting married on that one question. They would not want that man or that woman picking out a mother or father for their child. But you know it's possible. It's possible. That could happen. Be careful who you date. Don't be one of the casualties. If you're here today, if you're not a Christian, thinking mostly of young people, but as parents we need to teach our young people. The only thing that matters 100 years from now to any of us is whether or not we're with God. That's all that's going to matter. Nothing else is going to matter. We don't care. We don't care about nothing except where we'll spend our eternity. And those who live with God are going to live with God because they prepared to do so. They were smart up front. They made wise choices. And that's what we are alive to do, to make good choices. If you can believe God, and if there is within you a desire to stop sinning so you can walk with God, get sin out of the way, and if you're willing to be immersed in water for the forgiveness of sins, we hope you'll do that today, become a child of God, and start walking the way of eternal life. For those who have not been as faithful as they ought to be, you need to repent, ask God to forgive you. To our young people, think, be careful, be wise, think, and make good choices. If you need to respond to the Lord, please come while we stand and while we sing.
Why do you wait, dear brother? Oh.